The United States Senate needs to be made more representative.
The structure of the Senate is fine. What really needs to be addressed is the financing of political campaigns.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
I'm James Weingardner, sitting in for Pastor Lutz, and we're so glad that you've joined us. This is a great subject, a very interesting subject, focused in the United States of America, and we want our panelists to introduce themselves. We'll begin with Bishop Michael to my right.
My name is Bishop Michael Olson, and I serve as the Roman Catholic Bishop of the Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
My name is Mel ROBECK. I'm an Assemblies of God minister, and I serve my church at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, where I am Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations.
And I'm Tom PLUMBLEY. I'm the Senior Minister at First Christian Church in downtown Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Our subject today is about the United States Senate and certain challenges that have come up. Might one solution to legislative gridlock and the feeling of many Americans that they are not well represented be to remake the United States Senate? Policy analyst Kristen Ebnhard laid out problems and possible solutions in an article for Fulcrum in February 2021. While the Senate, in contrast to the House of Representatives, was never intended to represent people but rather states, one could argue that the nation's founders could not have foreseen how far out of balance the modern Senate has become and how many Americans are not represented at all. At its founding, the nation's largest states had roughly 13 times the population of its smallest states. Today, California is 67 times the size of Wyoming, and Texas is 46 times the size of Vermont. Fully half the population is represented by 18 senators, while the smallest 26 states have 52 senators. The figures skew even greater in favor of white Americans because the smallest states, Wyoming, Vermont, the Dakotas, and Maine, have more homogeneous Anglo populations, while the largest states, California, Texas, Florida, and New York, are the most ethnically diverse. The disparity matters in terms of funding too. When Wyoming, which is 89% white, receives 50 times the federal dollars per capita as California, which is 40% white. The Senate version of bills prevails over the House version 82% of the time. In addition, the Senate has exclusive power for all treaties and nominations, including to all the federal courts. Other nations with similar bicameral legislative arrangements do not rest such power in the less representative body. Eberhardt outlines 4 ways to make the Senate more balanced, 2 of which could be accomplished without amending the Constitution. One of these would be to add states. More than 4 million American citizens live in Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the Mariana Islands and have no representation at all. The other would be to subdivide states. In other words, create 3 states out of Texas, 5 states out of California, and so forth, as long as any of the new subdivisions would be no less than 13 times the size of the smallest states. All this sounds very different and is certainly out-of-the-box thinking. Question 1, is it morally right for Senate representation to be as out of balance as it is? Question 2, would more representative Senate be less susceptible to the sort of gridlock we've experienced over the last dozen years? And 3, are Americans simply comfortable with the way things are, with so little legislation actually being passed, with the majority of us quite underrepresented, and so many of our fellow Americans not represented at all. In this discussion, we're going to begin with Tom.
Thank you very much. I guess I want to begin by making the point that's in the moderator's statement that it could be argued that the founders could not have foreseen how far out of balance representation in the Senate is today. This exaggerated imbalance of representation and the way that it skews toward white folks as opposed to people of color who are rapidly becoming the majority of Americans. And the fact that so many Americans are not represented at all. In the days of the founders, there were no Americans who were not represented in the Congress. Today, there are, as you stated in your opening statement, there are 4 million of them. You know, all you have to do is go to Washington, D.C. and see all the residents driving around with license plates that say taxation without representation on the license plates. It's kind of been their motto for D.C. for all these years. Now, the specifics of the proposals that Kristen Eberhard makes in her article, I simply find fascinating because they're so far out of the box. The notion that we would have a new state of South Texas or a new state of Los Angeles County or something like that is fascinating to imagine the dynamics by which that would come to be, and not to mention the dynamics of what it would look like in action. But when you look at the fact that folks in Wyoming and folks in Vermont and folks in South Dakota have so much more power than fully half of the people of the United States, half of the citizens of the United States. I'm not sure that the founders would have built the Senate to look the way that it currently does.
Michael?
Well, it's a very interesting discussion. I think the catalyst for this, first of all, is the fact that is identified by the 13 years where the government has done nothing. All right. Now, I think you go back to the founding of the republic, and the key interest for the founders was that we avoid tyranny. Right, and of course it was an experiment in Democratic Republic that's been ongoing for over 200, almost 250 years. I think what's neglected and while the founders wanted an inefficient government to avoid tyranny, they didn't want a moribund government. All right, and there's a difference with that, and I think that's what we have in part because the gridlock is caused by financing of campaigns where who's controlling things are not so much the voters, all right, but also the special interest and the lobbyists, all right, that you've developed a class of lobbyists who are a lot of them former politicians, as I should know, that promote an isolation and for financial self-interest. I think that what needs to be looked at, and the result has been, frankly, is that the legislative dimensions of government have been foisted upon the courts. which is not the role of the courts. Same with some of the executive functions, and the legislative functions have been foisted on the executive session with things like executive orders. All right, which was not envisioned by the founders and wasn't even envisioned 50 years ago, but these are emergency things because something has to get done for the sake of governance. And I think we have to start even there. If we just simply subdivide states or start dividing in representation on race or on economic status, we're going to have more division, we're going to have more discord, and it'll be less defining of us as a country, as the United States of America, which is really defined by the Constitution, and is, at least ideally, and not according to race or creed or economic status.
Dan?
So there's an incredible paradox, I think, that we see, because on the one hand, we as a country and as a society believe in democracy, and we believe in the infinite value of each individual. So the idea that one individual's voice is dampened because they live in California and one person's voice is amplified because they live in Maine is seemingly unjust. At the same time, so much of the American experiment was exactly as Michael said, which is to avoid tyranny. And one of the elements of tyranny that I think our founders were trying to avoid was the hegemony of the majority over the rights of the minority. So as someone who is a minority in the United States, one of the things that I've appreciated the most about being an American is that my rights as a Jew, which the Jewish people comprise less than 2% of the population of the United States, that my rights are secured against the hegemony of a majority Christian country. And one of the genius elements of the Senate is that it sort of propels forward the rights of those that live in certain states sort of over and above the rights of people who live in other states. The smaller states have a disproportionate representation by design. So the question is that a good design? And I think when we have a society in which we believe in forbearance and collaboration and compromise, we're a much stronger society. So one of the things that I really, really regret is that the United States Senate got rid of the filibuster for judicial nominations. Because if you have to get more than 60 people to agree on whether someone should be on the bench, you're going to have a broader sense of, yes, that person should serve. And sometimes I'm going to have people who agree with me, and sometimes I'm not going to have people that agree with me, but it's going to shake out in a reasonably equitable way. But one of the things that we've seen as some of those elements that made the Senate a unique deliberative body has eroded over time is that the Senate has become a far more entrenched partisan environment. If we were to break the country into more states, you would see, I think, an increase of what has been called the big sort, where you'll have urban folks with urban mindsets creating certain states, rural folks with rural mindsets creating certain states. And I'm not sure that's a good thing either. I live in Florida. Florida is a lot of different states rolled into one. You have South Florida, where I live, which is sort of an urban cosmopolitan kind of a vibe. You have Central Florida, which is sort of a mix. You have Northern Florida, which has a lot more in common with Alabama than it does with Miami. But we all have to try to figure out how we're going to live together. And I think that figuring out how to do that, based on the fact that the Senate is never going to vote itself out of power, so these beautiful arguments are sort of theoretical, I think could strengthen the existing way in which the Senate itself operates.
Mel?
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings about this whole discussion. In one sense, we are in the American religious town hall meeting, and I'm wondering where religion fits in all of this. I'm not sure. You know, you can say, well, there's a moral question here, and yes, I would say there is a moral question here. I'm just not sure that the time we spend on this particular question is best used. But let me get very personal. I think I've announced on this show previously that I am a registered Republican. Now, I don't vote Republican in every election. In fact, a lot of elections I don't vote very much Republican at all. But the fact is, it used to stand for something that I believed in. I would say that living in California, I have found that as a Californian, my rights as a Republican are basically gone. We have a supermajority of Democrats in power. We have a governor who is a Democrat. He may be recalled this year. I don't know. I really doubt it. We have Elizabeth Warren doing television things saying, you know, you Democrats are letting the Republicans take over. You can't let them do that. They're, you know, it's all Trump, Trump, Trump. I didn't vote for Trump. You know, I could never vote for Trump, you know. But the fact of the matter is, when I go to the vote, all I get is things that are really important for the Democratic Party, not for the Republicans. The Republicans are not listed there at all. When it comes to an early election, that is in June when we go to the primaries, if the Democrats' supermajority manage to say, okay, from now on, the only people that will appear on the final one are the ones who got the top 2 votes. Doesn't matter. You can't have one from this party and one from that party. I always have to vote for Democrats, for governor, for senator, for Congress people. It's just the way it's set up. And that, to me, is a form of tyranny. It's exactly what we're opposed to, in a sense, because what we have is a single party controlling what the rest of the state will look like. Now, break us up into 5 states. Okay, we'll get maybe one Republican state, which will be up there in the boonies, you know, in the mountains, and we'll get 3 more Democrat states. And then where am I? In Los Angeles County, as a white male Republican, I'm probably in the lowest 10%. I will get no representation in anything ever. So I think this is the kind of a thing where I don't think we gain anything. You know, it sounds like I'm really opposed to all change. Well, maybe, mostly, but I think in this case it's a good. There are good reasons. I think we are better off the way we are than considering all these other changes.
All right, Tom.
Well, Mel, those of us who live on the left side of center in the state of Texas are absolutely without representation as well. Yeah, there are a couple of centers where that doesn't take place. But the issue then is, how do we let everyone feel more represented? There are millions and millions of people who simply do not feel well represented, and they become cynical and they become untrusting of government. And that's the danger to democracy that we're seeing, I think, is that cynicism that you just laid out, that you just exhibited for all of us, and that I responded to, saying I feel just the same way. The longer we go with so many people not feeling able to have their voice heard, the more we run the risk of getting ourselves in a situation to where somebody's going to light a match that's going to light a fuse that we can't come back from. And that's the reason that I think proposals like this, whether any of these are the direction we should go, that out-of-the-box thinking like this is helpful for us, because we are at a time in our nation's history, much as we were, in the late 1940s, in the early post-World War II era, when the United States had to reimagine who it was, and who it was on the international stage, and who it was internally. And I think the pandemic, the insurrection of January 6th, all of that has thrown us into a position where we have an opportunity to rethink who we are and reimagine and let ourselves be taken to a different place. And I find suggestions like those of Ms. Eberhard exciting.
Thank you, Tom. Let's go to a break.
We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you and today's closing statements.
Welcome back. An engaging discussion, and as Mel pointed out, more political than religious. However, an important one for us to think about. And let's sum up now with our panelists. Bishop?
Thinking about the religious dimension of this, even in preparation for the program, what kept coming to mind was that verse from the prophet Isaiah, "Come, let us reason together." And I think in a certain sense, the Senate, at least structurally, by its design, was precisely that's the place where reasoning takes place, where some sense of barter, where we move from the strong, virulent arguments in the House to sort of finally solidifying some sense of coming together. In the past, as the United States has always had to reimagine itself, it's returned to the modern principles of its founding. So, for example, with voter representation, it was voter representation for American citizens, all right, and then especially recognizing the injustice against women and then injustice against African Americans and access to voting that way. But it was again a return back to the first principles of its founding in modernity. What the challenge is to our republic is that we now have kind of a postmodern rejection of some of those first principles, all right? And how do you reimagine yourself in the way that we have done as a modern nation when there's sort of a return to some sort of segmentation, which becomes really a war very quickly between segments of population. Segments of population based on gender, based on values, based on religion, based on race. And that is something new to the American experiment.
Reverend?
What has made America great is its ability to adapt. I say change the numbers. Some might say change the rules. But I think what needs to be said is get off dead center. Come, let us reason together drove the Roman Senate also. But the Roman Senate also found itself very susceptible to a takeover by autocracy and a dictatorship. And therefore, we need to always be re-examining the coming and letting the senators reason together and the way they do it and who they represent as they do it.
Rabbi?
So I think we have often thought of America using those great words as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And what happens when America loses faith with the people that is their government? I grew up outside Washington, D.C., and knowing that there are hundreds of thousands of people mostly of darker complexion, who had no voice in their government, was something that always seemed to be unfair and unjust. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean that America is becoming ever more a nation of minority rule? And I think in order for people to regain a sense of faith in our institutions like the U.S. Senate, then it requires the people who inhabit those institutions to not always press their advantage just because they can, but to exercise comedy and forbearance and decency and collaboration to rebuild a sense of faith in that institution, or otherwise people may lose their faith in the entire institution of the U.S. government, which could be catastrophic.
Well, as I think about it, I want people out there to realize that even as a Republican, I have a very deep concern for the rights of all people to be represented when they vote and to have representation in the Senate and in the House. It's very important to me. But I don't like to have things crammed down my throat any more than they like to have things crammed down their throat. And my concern about one-party rule, which basically moves toward, in a sense, the call to make D.C. a state. Why not? It's a city. Why not just put it into one of those other states? Well, because they get 2 more votes in a particular party at this particular time. And I would say the minds of Americans change. There was a time when the Warren Court, for instance, was considered to be liberal and the conservatives hated it. Now we have a conservative court and the liberals hate it, So it goes back and forth. I think we're much more in the middle kind of people, but the reality is our rhetoric has been horrible. It hasn't been helped by a former president. It hasn't been helped by people in the Senate. It hasn't been helped by all the lobbyists that are looking one way or another. It hasn't been helped by any politician as far as I can tell. What we really need is to go back and do, as you have mentioned, go back to the basics, look again, see how better we could do it, and then hope that God will direct and guide us in that.
Thank you. What an interesting and engaging subject. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed. So that the rest of the world could see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom not only in theory, but in reality. Now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. May the God of all of us bless all of you.